Hey guys, Mr.B here. So today I've got a 2012 Toyota Prius, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to remove and install the head gasket. Obviously it's blown. We got that white smoke just oozing right out the tailpipe. The aroma. So this is a telltale sign of an engine that's burning coolant. This car has a blown head gasket. I do have other videos on my diagnosis of this vehicle as well, so check those out. We're at the point now where the head gasket's blown enough to where there is that white smoke coming out the tailpipe. These Priuses, these third gen Priuses with the 1.8 liter engine are known for this problem after 200,000 miles. This one has 282,000 miles. All right, so I'm back here at the trunk, and like I said, just for precautionary measures, I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect both batteries. We've got our high voltage battery right here. You can gain access to it by removing the little cargo tray that covers up the spare tire. And then of course I will also disconnect the little 12 volt battery just to be safe. This high voltage plug, you just kind of pull that piece that way, turn, twist, and there you go. And I am also going to disconnect my battery cables just to be safe. I'm going to disconnect both of them. All right, so now that I got that battery disconnected, I've got both cables loose. It's time to go ahead and go under the hood. This whole cowl has to come loose. So now that that's opened up, there's all these 10 mils along here that I got to take loose. As I go through and do this, I will be using my power tools, my air ratchet, my impact gun. Just keep in mind, guys, you can do all of this by hand. The power tools just make it go a little bit quicker. There's my coil packs. What I'll do next is I'll take my spark plugs out because I know that those have to come out for when I take the cylinder head off. I'm also going to work on getting this engine harness removed. We've got bolts all along here that hold the harness in place. We've got connectors to take loose. So I'm going to start with the spark plugs and then start getting all these wires loose. Most of the bolts on this engine, guys, are like 10 mils, 14 mils, 17s, and there might be a 21 here and there. But these Toyotas are built with 12, 14, and 17 millimeter head bolts for the most part. All right, so there's a clamp down in there. All right, so there's a connector down in there that I gotta take loose, a connector right here, and another one right there. So I gotta get all three of those connectors loose in order to get this wiring harness out of the way. Looks like we've got, I'll just take the throttle body out with it. We've got this hose here with a clamp, and then we've got bolts right in there that hold this intake onto the engine. What looks like vacuum hose coming in right here. I'm going to take that loose. Make sure that's not hanging us up. Looks like I got all the bolts loose for this. Tube here. All right, there's my intake manifold. All right, so my next step, guys, is I think what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go ahead and jack this car up and support it by jack stands. I'm getting to that point now where I really do need to drain the coolant. Probably should have already done it since I did have a bit of a leak, but I'm gonna drain the coolant. I'm gonna take loose those wires back there, and I wanna be able to drain the coolant, drain the oil, and also start taking apart the front cover over here to get to the timing chains, and I also want to get these wires out of the way so that it makes it a little bit easier to get this valve cover off. Step is to remove this plastic piece here. Access to this, I'll be able to take that bolt loose for the harmonic balancer. I'm going to use my impact gun. All right, so now to take this pulley the rest of the way off, there's two bolt holes right there, and those bolt holes are for my bolt grip puller set. So what I have over here is, of course, my bolt grip puller set. The way it works is you find the bolt that threads into that crankshaft pulley. You thread the bolts on with this in the middle of it, and then the screw pushes in on the crankshaft and forces that pulley loose. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this set up. I would recommend using a cone on the end of the tool. That way it catches on the crankshaft and doesn't mess up the threads. M8 by 1.25. To zip it the rest of the way out. So the way it's designed to work is the bolts grip onto the pulley, and that screw pushes on the crankshaft to pull the pulley off. Pretty simple. So up in here, we do have a couple of connectors to take loose. One right here for the oil pressure switch, and another one right there. I got those loose. Coming up top, those wires do go up to the rest of my harness. Looks like there's a little tab right here. Okay, I got it loose. So there's the rest of my wiring harness. And I can just pull this off to the side as much as I can, get it out of my way. That way I can gain access to everything else. So my next step here is to drain the remaining coolant and the engine oil. So I got to get this whole plastic piece off. There's clips and bolts all along this plastic cover. So I'm going to get that plastic cover off. All right, so now that I got that cover loose, I can gain access to my oil drain plug. So I'm gonna go ahead and drain the oil. The reason why I'm draining the oil, because I do have to take that front cover off. This piece right in here. I don't want to make a big oily mess, and you should change the oil anytime you change a head gasket, because coolant could mix with the oil, and we don't want any further engine damage because of possible cross-contamination. And then the other thing too is I'm going to drain the coolant. So there is a drain valve right there at the radiator, there's a yellow, there it is. There's a yellow handle that you can loosen. Little valve here, so you just turn that valve. You can turn it by hand. You might need a pair of pliers, you might not, but you turn that and the coolant starts to come out. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and zip off all the bolts for the valve cover. We've got all these bolts all the way around. There is some in the middle here. I don't think that one has to come loose. So now I got all these bolts loose. It does help sometimes to go ahead and just use a screwdriver to kind of pry that cover up. So there's my valve cover, cam cover, whatever you want to call it. There's my camshafts, the rockers, the timing chain. All right, so my next order of business is to get this EGR valve coolant hose assembly out of here. So I'm going to take that clamp loose, get that hose out of the way. There's a nut that holds this in place right here, and then there's another bolt or nut up underneath this bracket. I'll loosen up those nuts without breaking them off for that EGR tube that goes down to my manifold. We'll just hope and pray on that one. And then it looks like there's another hose clamp right there, another hose there. Get those apart, get this whole assembly out of the way, and then I can gain access, better access to my coolant tube, my upper radiator hose down in there, to get that out of the way. So that way I got plenty of space to lift this head up and get it out of the way. So for that back bolt, I did realize that once you get these hoses off, it's easier to get to it with a deep socket and an extension. That's a 12mm bolt right down in there to get this piece loose. If you ever need one, these come in handy as well. This is a cable operated hose clamp tool. The way it's designed is this piece here pinches down on your hose clamp. When you pull the trigger, it tightens it up and it spreads open that hose clamp to be able to take it loose. I did have to use this on one of my hose clamps. These things really come in handy. I recommend getting one of those for when you need it. So in order to get this piece the rest of the way out, I am going to remove this stud. It's an E socket that goes on the end of it. This one's an E8. Okay, so that E8 fits on the end of that stud. So it looks like there is another stud in the back, way down in there, where that nut was, right behind here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take that stud out as well. All right, so now that that piece is out, I have full access to this plug right here for that sensor. I've got full access to my upper radiator hose. And in order to get that little piece loose, I am gonna go ahead and remove that 10mm bolt right there. Actually, that looks like a 12. Either way, I'm gonna remove that bolt. There's also another bolt down here, up in there by the trans, that holds this upper radiator hose tube piece in place, and also the fuel line. So what I'll do is I'll take that bolt loose and I'll zip out my bolts for my fuel rail for the fuel injectors, and this fuel hose up here is flexible, so I'll probably just pull this fuel rail up and out of here and set it off to the side over here somewhere. That way it's out of my way. So the next thing I'm going to have to remove is this electric water pump assembly. So I'm going to have to remove that lower radiator hose. There are 5 bolts that hold this water pump on. 2 are right there, 2 right in here, and then another one, I believe, down on the bottom. You do have to remove this to get the front cover off. All right, so the next piece I'm going to go ahead and remove is the oil filter housing. It's got 4 bolts there. And now I can gain access to the rest of those bolts for the front cover. Before I go and start taking the front cover apart, I do want to mention that, and I should have filmed this, this engine is almost on top dead center of compression on cylinder number 1. So what you have on these engines is you have a timing mark right there for ignition timing. Obviously, we can't set ignition timing on this engine, but Toyota was nice enough to still give us the marks. So that 0 degree mark right there, as long as the notch and that harmonic balancer right there lines up with that 0 mark, it's on top dead center of compression. So I have it to where it's not quite at top dead center, but it is pretty close. Luckily on these engines, there are marks on the crank sprocket and the engine block to where we can check those marks as well when we get the front cover off. But if you want to do yourself a favor and get it on top dead center of compression right away, that 0 mark right there, as long as it lines up with that mark, like I said, you'll be at top dead center of compression on cylinder number 1. Before I dig into the rest of this engine, I am going to go ahead and get my exhaust manifold bolts loose. So we got a bolt there for the heat shield right there and right there. I'm going to get this heat shield off and then gain access to the exhaust manifold. So now that the heat shield's loose, I can gain access to those nuts for the exhaust manifold. There's quite a few of them back here. I'm going to take these loose by hand with my ratchet. I'm not going to use any power tools because I want to be able to feel how tight they get when they come out, because if it gets caught on some rust, I don't want to break this off and then have more work later on down the road when the head's off. So I'm going to use my hand, use my ratchet by hand and my hand tools, and make sure that I can work this nut back and forth if I need to make sure nothing breaks off. So there's also a bolt right there that holds the exhaust manifold in place. There's 2 bolts on the engine block right there. Honestly, I'm probably just going to remove those because I don't want to mess with that one. It looks pretty rusty, crusty. I don't want it to break off of the manifold, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen those 2 bolts off the block, and then I should be able to get that manifold to pull off of the cylinder head far enough to where I can pop that cylinder head off. Okay, make my life easier, I'm gonna go ahead and remove these rubber exhaust hangers. There's 1 on each side. That'll make my life a lot easier to get that exhaust manifold off. So as you can see, by removing the exhaust hangers there, now my exhaust manifold is free from the cylinder head. So now that that's freed up, I can go ahead and start working on my front cover. And first I gotta start working on the engine mount to get that front cover off. So there is an engine mount, drivetrain mount in the back. There's another trans mount over there, way in there. If I take this loose, the engine will drop a little bit, so I will put my floor jack on it underneath with a wood block to support the weight of the engine. So now I've got my engine supported by my floor jack. I do have a wood block in between there. The reason for that wood block is so that I don't dent the oil pan when I'm going up and down with the engine or jostling things around. With the weight of the drivetrain on that floor jack, I want to evenly disperse that weight by using that wood block. I'm gonna go ahead and start getting this engine mount apart. I've got these 2 big bolts nuts right there. Another one right there. Another one right there. And we do have some oddball brackets attached to this as well. Once that comes loose, I can start working on getting this bracket apart, and then all the bolts for my front cover, every little bolt around the outside of this cover, including, I think there's one in the middle right there. Every little bolt along the outside of that front cover needs to come loose in order to get this front cover off. So I'm going to work on that. So there is another bolt right in there to get this engine mount out, and I'm thinking the best way to do that is to just remove these bolts here for the coolant reservoir and get that coolant reservoir out of the way. So there is one last bolt right up under here. It takes a deep 14 millimeter socket. You gotta get that loose, and then the mount comes off. So now that that's out of the way, I've got a bolt there, a bolt there, a bolt there, and maybe another bolt right there. Yep, definitely another bolt right there to take loose to get this bracket off. And then, like I said, it's all those bolts, little 10 mils along the outside, and there's one in the middle there. So to get the tensioner out, it's this piece right here. There's two 10 millimeter nuts. You take that out, that's the tensioner for the timing chain. All right, so now I got the front cover off, I got the timing chains off. Those are actually super simple to do. The one guide just kind of slips down. You pull it right off. It's only held in by the tensioner and the front cover when it's on. And then the other guide that goes over here, there's two bolts for it. So those were super easy to take apart. So I'm at the point now where cylinder head is ready to come off. So I gotta start by removing all these bolts for the cam holders. And I'm gonna start from the outside and work my way in. That way I don't distort anything or warp anything. And then when I get these apart, I'm actually gonna go ahead and put these in plastic, wrap them in garbage bags, so that way they don't rust or get scratched or anything like that. So now that the camshafts are out, this whole top piece right here does come out. There's a bolt there and a bolt there to take loose, and then this piece comes up. And you can gain access to the cylinder head bolts that are way under there. The little rocker arms will come out. If you really want to, you could get fancy and pop these out so they don't get lost in the process of removing the head. So I'm gonna go ahead and work on that. All right, so now I got that piece off. I've exposed the cylinder head bolts. There are quite a few of them here. These are all spline drive. So it takes this size spline drive. It's, let's see, 12 millimeter spline drive. These are pretty common on German cars. And of course they decided to use these for the cylinder head bolts. So if you don't have one of those, you're gonna have to go buy one and at least get the 12 millimeter spline drive to get these cylinder head bolts loose. I'm gonna work from the outside and work my way back in, so that way I don't warp the cylinder head in the process. All right guys, so now that I've got the cylinder head off, I've got of course the pistons exposed here, and of course we've still got the old head gasket on there. Just go ahead and rip that off. Kind of stuck on that dowel pin. So there's our old head gasket. Like I said, these are known for blown head gaskets. They go bad all the time. I'm gonna clean all that up, clean this up, put a new head gasket on it, and seal this up. You know, you really want to make sure that the block's not distorted or warped. Same way with the cylinder head. So I'll be using the straight edge to check for warpage. All right, so I am gonna have to let this sit for a while. I'll be coming back to this next weekend. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a little bit of WD-40, spray that on the cylinders, on the pistons. That way the cylinders don't rust at all while I'm not able to work on it. So I'm just gonna take and put a good coating along the whole cylinder wall there of WD-40. That way that bare metal that's down in there doesn't wind up getting rusty or crusty. I'm also going to cover this engine with a garbage bag, so I'm going to put a garbage bag over top of it. I'm going to cover up the area where the timing chains go as well, and then just for added measure, I'll probably take a tarp and cover the whole engine with a tarp as well. You really want to make sure that nothing gets inside of here when it's apart, and that no debris or animals or water, of course, gets inside of there. Very, very important to cover this up.